Hello and welcome to ScotRock.
We're your hosts from Climb Scotland, Robert Mackenzie.
And me, Cal McBain, catch up with climbers every 2 weeks who have different epic tales to tell us.
We hope you enjoy the show.
And remember, when you're out climbing, be safe and do your buddy checks.
Welcome back to ScotRock, the, let's be honest these days, the periodic podcast. The special treat that comes along every once in a while. Thank you to all our listeners for sticking around and not giving me too much stick for my relaxed approach to the podcast. And I hope that when we do bring you something, it is worth it. ScotRock, bringing you that little nugget of gold whenever we can. And well, this week, the nugget is big. This is a big nugget. He is a big nugget. We can all say that. Today on ScotRock, giving us a special two-parter, we have the man, the myth, the nugget, Robbie Phillips. Robbie has actually been part of ScotRock since almost the beginning, as a regular guest on our controversial episodes, but he's never been given the opportunity to have his own story told. Maybe we didn't think he was worthy yet, I don't know, but I think he's definitely earned his moment in the ScotRock spotlight now. He is a man that needs no introduction, but I'm going to do one anyway. Robbie's a climber. He calls himself a climber. He's one of the most hardcore climbers of our generation, but not because he's out there projecting 9B+ with fellow Edinburgher Will Bosey, but because he's forged his life by immersing himself in every aspect of what our climbing community, old and young, consider to be the most important parts of our sport. The physical specimen that is Robbie Phillips trains hard to be able to climb hard on grades that are up there with the best, but not only in one discipline. He's an all-round badass. With some major ticks, boulder, sport, trad, he's even done a bit of winter. He's also a developer, searching for the next great king lines and opening up new possibilities for the rest of us to enjoy. He's an adventurer, imagining, planning and executing some wild expeditions to some incredible locations around the world. And what I consider to be the most important part, through his own climbing, his travels, his work, his YouTube, Robbie soaks up, engages and inspires a huge amount in our climbing community. Myself and Callum have this life lesson that it's more about the people than the climbing, and Robbie embodies that with every trip. Myself and Robbie sat down for close to 3 hours recording this and split it into two parts. Part one, we talk a lot about his latest exploits out in one of Scotland's most adventurous locations. But in part two, we get to know a little bit more about the man himself, his backstory, his motivations, and the future of Robbie. So, bringing you a next gold nugget. Sit back and enjoy the chat with Robbie Phillips.
Yes, yeah, totally.
That'd be a bit odd.
Wouldn't make any sense.
Yeah.
For sure.
But talking about people that have, I'm going to say, earned their interview. You.
Oh, yeah. Thanks.
Finally getting your own ScotRock interview.
I know.
This is your 4th appearance?
Have we started?
Yeah.
I didn't even know we'd started.
No, this is the way I do things.
Oh,
Just
right,
roll
okay.
in.
Cool. Yeah.
This is the way ScotRock. You have listened to this podcast before,
I have,
right?
yeah. Actually, I really enjoy listening to it, which is why I've been casing you for like getting some more episodes out there. I do love hearing about the different characters of Scottish climbing. You know?
Who's been your favourite so far?
Honestly, Jamie Lowther.
Really?
I really
It
loved.
was so good.
I loved that one. Yeah.
So good. He's just got such, for a young gun who's just kind of coming out of the teenage scene into his own climbing world, like, what a cool attitude he has.
Yeah,
right?
no, he does. He is, and I've been climbing. Well, I've not been climbing. I've trained with him.
Yeah.
A couple of times recently, getting to know him better, and he's such a cool guy. He's got so much potential, and he's got a great attitude. He's been doing, climbing trips.
Yeah.
He did his trip to Sweden and did a trip to Spain and got some good stuff done, and just quite excited to see where he takes that.
He's been on a proper roll lately as well. 'Cause it's not like easy stuff he's been doing. He's going out and pushing it.
No, definitely.
It's awesome.
And he's got that fire as well, that determination
Yeah.
you need to be able to pull off the hard stuff.
I think he's just realised that he's able to do this stuff now.
Yeah, he's also savagely strong.
Right.
Like I had two bouldering sessions with him on his home board, and I know on your home board you're always stronger, but like I couldn't keep up with him, and he was a demon. Yeah.
Yeah, me and Callum tried to play on his home board one day, and we quickly decided it was a bad idea. We were just going to get embarrassed.
Yeah. But anyway, it's good. It's good to see. So yeah, his episode was really good. So anyone listening, if you haven't listened to the Jamie Lowther podcast, I'd really recommend that one. That's a good one. Nice. Good episode.
Nice. Well, yeah, I think out of everybody that we've had so far, you may have earned yours more, not because of the things you've done in your life, but because this is technically your 4th time on the podcast and you've not actually been able to tell your story yet. So I suppose you've put the work in. You've been part of the scene as long as ScotRock's existed.
Yeah.
So it's finally time.
Yeah.
Excited. But yeah, you're just back. The reason that we're doing this now is because you're just back from Kilda. You want to shout about it. I know you want to shout about it. And you're just away off to Spain. So we've got a very short window to do this in. So yeah, how was the trip? What was the mission? What did you get done out there?
So I went to St Kilda last year and this year, and last year felt like the trip of a lifetime, and to be able to go back there for a second year in a row to get done what we saw out there, to see what we saw in that first year and didn't get a chance to do, was like literally, it was just so amazing to get back out there. But I never thought it would be possible, because for people that don't know what St Kilda is a group of islands off the west coast of the Outer Hebrides. It's 60 miles off the west coast of Harris, and it is the westernmost tip of the British Isles. These are the most remote islands in the British Isles. If you go any further west, you hit North America. And the climbing potential out there is remarkable. St Kilda's also got more than just rock. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site for both natural and cultural heritage, which makes it a very unique place. It's one of only a small number of places globally that fit that characteristic. It's a marine conservation area, and it's got such a history of human inhabitation and wildlife. I guess the first thing to mention about the cultural side of St Kilda is the people that lived there.
Yeah.
I mean, there is proof, evidence that people have lived there for an estimated 4,500 years, which is about as early as people have been in the Outer Hebrides, and there's thought that it could actually be longer than that. And but people haven't lived there since the 1930s, after it got evacuated. But the thing that fascinates me most about the people that lived on St Kilda is their very unique way of life, their practices and the way they survived there in these very remote islands. Now, you got to imagine, what it would be like to be the first people visiting St Kilda all those thousands of years ago. You're sailing on these like little boats across the sea, miles and miles and miles of these huge waves crashing up and down, and then arriving on this rocky landscape. There's really there's cliffs just bursting out the sea, apart from this one very small bay where it's just got good access onto the land. And then you'll be greeted by this very lush landscape, these green rolling hills, and skies filled with birds, literally flying everywhere.
Millions of them.
Yeah. Now, people think that, the idea of living on these remote islands, I guess a contemporary thought would be, imagine it's such a hard way of life, such a difficult place to exist. I think what you really have to think is in the eyes or in the minds of the people that first landed there, what they would be looking for. Guess one of the main things they'd be looking for is food. And looking at the sky, just millions of birds everywhere.
Yeah.
That is a food source. And that is how the St. Kildans actually survived. That's one of the ways in which they survived. They would climb the sea cliffs and capture the birds and the birds' eggs. They would eat fulmars, gannets, anything with wings. Puffins. It's got such a wide diversity of bird life there. And also, of course, they'd be fishing in the sea, and they also had agriculture. But the birds were a staple. Yeah. They had the fowling season, the season when they would catch the birds. And during that time, they would get onto the sea cliffs. They would use these long poles with sort of cord at the end to capture the birds. I remember reading in one of the books that the birds would almost be inquisitive of this long pole kind of coming towards them, and almost looking at this sort of wee noose thing attached to it, kind of curiously, as it went round their neck and suddenly grabbed a hold of them. Of course, at which point the birds have got no choice but to go with their captors. and that's it, Unfortunately, that was the way that it went. But they really lived in tandem with the environment. They didn't take more than they needed. They were a small population of, I think, not more than 200 people at probably the strongest point of people living there. And they would use every part of the bird. They would use the feathers for clothing and material. They would use the meat of, say, for eating. The oils they had use for as well. And even the bones, after they'd eaten and used the rest of the bird, the bones they would bury in the earth, and the bones would enrich the soil for their agriculture.
Awesome fertilizer.
Exactly. Yeah. So they used everything, Yeah. And so you've got this culture now that's existing for thousands of years on the islands of St. Kilda, who are using the birds as a main food source. They're literally climbing these sea cliffs, and climbing has become a part of their being, their culture. It's not just a means for survival, it's also a social hierarchy, because there are stories that you can read of the St. Kildans using the climbs as a means to... I guess there was one story actually where the young men had to go right to the very edge of a cliff, have their toes right on the very edge of a cliff, and I think they had to hold their arms out and stare down the cliff. And if they managed to do this, it meant that they were ready to take a wife. If they couldn't, then unfortunately weren't. It was something along the lines.
Is that what we've been doing this whole time?
Yeah. Sorry, there was this other amazing story of the climb that St. Kildans saw it was the hardest of all the climbs they did. And it was a sea stack between the Isle of Herta, which is the main island, and the smaller Isle of Soy on the westernmost tip. Yeah. This sea stack, which was very difficult to access, it's right between these two islands. You'd have to sail out there in a little rowing boat to get to it. And they called this thing the Thumb. And it was 70 meters high.
How big?
70 meters.
70?
70 meters high.
Right.
And only the greatest of their climbers, could do it. Yeah. It was technically very challenging, and the way in which they did it, they'd row up to the base of the climb. Someone would jump out onto the rock face with a rope tied around their waist, a rope made entirely of horse hair. I think it was horse tail hair or something like that.
Must have been. And
there was only ever 2 ropes on the island, and the ropes in the climbing season were used for climbing, and in the off season were used for tying up boats. So these weren't regularly tested, by the UIAA. They weren't certified, They weren't force tested. They were ropes used for pretty much everything, and they had no climbing gear to protect a fall. These ropes were only used for the climber to fix once they'd gotten to their high point to bring the rest of the climbers up behind them. And so only the best climbers would go first. Yeah. And sometimes they wouldn't succeed. They would fall. And they would fall into the sea. And if they fell into the sea and were okay, they'd swim back to the boat, and they'd either have another crack at it, or let somebody else go. And that was the invention of deep water soloing.
There's the birthplace of deep water soloing.
Yeah, everyone thinks it was Chris Sharma. It bloody wasn't.
No,
it was the St Kildans. But so this climb, it was called the Thumb, and any climbers who achieved it were regarded as their greatest heroes.
Yeah.
You know, these guys who would, if they managed to climb this thing, they would get given, I think it was like 5 fulmar for climbing this thing to their family. And it was called the Thumb, and I read this in a book written in the 1600s by a guy called Martin, who went over to St Kilda to document their climbing and their culture. It was called the Thumb because there was a single move on it which required using your thumb in order to mantle onto a small protrusion on the wall and get established. This was written in the 1600s. When you think of the history of climbing, of technical climbing, we often regard the Victorian era as the birthplace of technical rock climbing.
Yeah.
But this is being spoken about technical movement on rock as early as the 1600s, and this is a climb that they've been doing for potentially hundreds, if not thousands of years. It blew my mind to find this out. The next thing was, I didn't know where exactly the Thumb was, and written in this book, it referred to the stack known as Stack Donna. So I had this amazing idea to go back to St Kilda and try and find and climb the Thumb. So I went back with a bunch of friends this year. It was me, a few friends, Hugo, Ryan Balhari as well, who were two camera people who joined me to document it. My climbing partner Will Burkett and our skipper Scott. I think Scott's second name is Scott Johnson. Trying to remember his company, Yachting Scotland. That's right, Yachting Scotland. If you're looking for a sailor to take you on a adventure sailing on the west coast of Scotland, then look no further.
What was the name of his boat?
His boat was called Summerled, which is of course the Lord of the Isles. It's a brilliant name. Yeah. It's also the name of one of our first ascents from the St Kilda trip, which I'll get onto in a bit. But anyway, went a good group of guys. When we arrived, we sailed around the islands and had a look at the sea stacks, and it was obvious from very early, as soon as we saw Stack Donna, that wasn't the sea stack. Because Stack Donna is this tiny little lump of rock. I mean, no birds nest on it. It was obvious. It's too small. The waves just crash right over the thing.
Not 70 meters.
Not 70 meters. However, there was another sea stack that looked really beautiful and really spectacular. And this thing did look about 70 meters, and it was called Stack Brearach. So we took the dinghy, we zipped around along to the sea stack, and we were circling the sea stack, doing 360s around it, trying to figure out the easiest line up there. In my mind, I was just trying to imagine being a St Kildan, trying to imagine there'll be birds up there on that wall. I'm doing a terrible accent. There'll be birds up there. That's like a pirate.
All right, song. Jack Sparrow.
Jack Sparrow, right, yeah. Anyway, imagine a St Kildan with a really strong Gaelic Scottish accent, looking at the sea stack, seeing the nests from this little rickety wooden boat that they're sailing about on, and we could see where the nests were. Yeah. We're there in September, by the way, so it's beyond the nesting season. The birds have gone, but we can see the guano
where they were.
Yeah, we can see where they were. There's guano covering this ledge. So I'm like, we need to get there. So where's the most obvious line? And then I saw it. There's this little ledge on the west face of the sea stack, and it looked like there was a weakness traversing from right to left, right round, spiraling up towards where the nests were. I thought that must be it. So me and Will jumped onto the sea stack and started climbing. And as we were climbing, in my mind I was thinking, where is this move? The Thumb. There must be this move. because this is what they named it after. There must be this move. I'm climbing around, and it's getting a bit steeper, a bit more challenging. It gets a bit overhanging actually, and the feet kind of drop away, and then I have to do this like weird cut loose foot move to get onto this weird mushroomy looking ledge. Yeah. And as I roll onto it, I find that actually my hands go upward into the sort of small roofy recess, and I feel like I'm actually kind of thumbing the roof. And then I wonder, is this the move, the thumb?
Oh my God.
Because actually I was thinking about it, the guy who wrote Martin, he wasn't a climber.
Yeah.
He was just documenting what he saw. Yeah. Yeah. And what he saw was challenging technical rock climbing and them moving in a particular way. And I think what he saw was them just thumbing the sides of the rock as they took a particularly balancy rock over onto a ledge. And then after that, you access the guano and the nests. And that was the move. I was literally walking in the footsteps, or maybe I should say climbing in the fingerprints. I felt like I was going back in time. And anyway, we got up to the guano ledge. Will built an anchor there. I took us another pitch up, and then Will took us to the top after that. It was a three pitch beast. And we stood on top. And there was that moment I just realised we're the first people to be standing on this in 140 years. Yeah. Since the last person who climbed this, which was some St Kildan bird guy. Some St Kildan chasing his dinner.
That, like, to be the first people to go back and repeat that move in so long, but a move that they've potentially been doing for thousands of years. There cannot be many climbs in the world that other people can go and redo that have that history.
I know.
That's incredible. And like, I often wonder this, like, I think I'm correct in saying this, but the name for the guys that went out catching the birds and collecting the eggs, Guineas.
I think I've heard that. I can't remember. Yeah.
And I often wonder this about the Guineas back in the day. Like, how hard were they actually climbing? Like, what was the hardest move? And that sounds like a fairly technical move for guys with horsehair around their waists. Yeah. Like, so how hard was that line? Yeah. Like, how hard are these guys actually climbing?
It was definitely technical rock climbing, and it's not something you could take a beginner on. Like a beginner rock climber would not be able to do that.
Even with all our modern gear.
Like it would there was technique to it. Yeah. You had to understand center of gravity. You had to have good footwork. Mm. Another thing to mention is they did this barefoot.
I was going to say, they wouldn't have had shoes either.
There was no Scarpa climbing shoes, Yeah. there was no Vibram rubber, They were using either even going barefoot or with very coarse woolly socks. Yeah. Which they said gave them better grip, but I honestly think it would be better barefooted. Yeah. I actually wish I had done it barefooted. I think I was
just for the nostalgia.
Yeah, I think it would have been fun to do it barefoot. But I actually did it in my my approach shoes. I think to give it a grade, I think it was somewhere about severe. Yeah. Maybe a hard severe. I don't know. It was something about that. It was tricky. Like, it's hard. I find it hard giving a number to these things because there's so much in it. It's such an adventurous scenario. Yeah. You're above the raging Atlantic, the water's frothing beneath you, like
the kind of water that you don't want to be deep water soloing above.
No, definitely not. It would be terrifying to fall into that. Also, when you were climbing it for the second, it's just as dangerous as it would be for the lead. Yeah. There was a huge pendulum, and the pendulum you'd be going straight into the water. At which point, I did wonder a little bit if it was worth even being roped up at that point, because being roped up and then landing in the water, like you're then kind of trapped with the rope, and I don't know. There was a whole lot of questions about how safe that actually was. Maybe there was more gear. I did look very hard. We actually did it as a 3 because our skipper Scott was really keen on the idea. He's a bit of a climber as well.
Yeah.
And he did it, and I'm sure Scott's not going to mind me saying this, but he made a total shambles of it. And he did say I was a fantastic guide. He did say that because I was guiding him the whole way along it and making sure he didn't put a foot out of place and made sure he grabbed everything perfectly. But he was very shaky on it. Yeah. I would. It was definitely like I was. My heart was a little bit in my mouth watching him. I was like, oh my god, I hope he does this. There was a tricky bit where you had to like. It wasn't campusing, but it was like you had to skip your feet along on an overhang, grabbing some pretty rounded, slopey jugs. And you had small feet, and then you really had to transition your body weight onto this small ledge that you're not going to stand up on. As soon as you get onto it, your hips, you have to really open your hips and really frog it.
Yeah.
And that's where you're kind of putting your thumbs and your hands into the roof of this little scoop. I mean, if you didn't have a good understanding of body position and center of gravity, you'd be out of there.
Yeah.
And that would be the move that I reckon St. Kildan's would fall off for sure.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you're on that ledge, if you get established on that ledge, it's unlikely you're going to fall off anywhere after that. The climbing eases much over. But at that point, you're probably about 10 meters above the water. You're high enough. And there's, it's, it definitely felt sketch.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
what's sketch to me about doing that with your captain is, do you guys know enough about sailing to have got yourselves home if you'd lost your captain that day?
Well, let me tell you something else. So
not that I'm doubting you, Scott. I'm sure you had it all day long, mate. But
Scott anchored the boat round the corner in a good anchor spot. Came over in the dinghy with it was basically me, Will, and Scott in this dinghy, right? Will was up on the wall. I jumped onto the wall. Scott had a small anchor for the dinghy, but we're out at the water's deep here. Yeah, we're not really sure how deep. And he had this anchor, and he just said, "This is our lifeline. This boat, this dinghy. We need this dinghy to get back to the main boat. If we don't have this dinghy, we're not getting back to the main boat. So we've got to make sure that this dinghy doesn't go anywhere whilst we're climbing." So he jumps onto the rock face, holding the anchor in his hand, and the dinghy just starts floating around the sea stack. I'm just like, wait a minute, what's happening to the dinghy? He's like, it's getting pulled by the force of the sea, like the current. It's getting pulled away. I'm like, Jesus Christ, man. I was like, we need to save this thing. And he's like, I've got the anchor in my hand. I just don't want to let go of it just yet. And I'm just like, too right, you don't want to let go of it. He's like, so we start trying to climb round, holding onto the anchor, and he's looking pure sketch, man. So I'm like, give me the anchor. So now I'm holding onto an anchor with one hand on the rock face, and I'm just like, and at this point, actually, I'm not tied into anything either, because Will's climbed around the other side, so we're essentially like soloing with an anchor in our hands, one hand on the rock, and we get to where it steepens out a bit, and Scott just says, just chuck it in. I'm sure it'll be fine. I think it'll be fine here. I think it'll be fine here. So we chuck the anchor in. We watch the anchor hit the water and float down. Yeah. And then we just watch the dinghy slowly just go round the corner and the rope go a little bit tight and then stop. And Scott can't quite see it. And he's like, is it okay? Is it okay? And I look around and I see the dinghy and it's just kind of holding there against the stack. Yeah, I think it's fine. It's not going anywhere. It's like, thank God for that.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So then we start climbing. So we climb to the top of the thing, right? 70 meters of sea stack adventure, bit of choss, but it's not got much traffic in the last 140 odd years. And we summit and we're like, yeah, we're having this is an amazing experience. At which point then we're right, we need to get down off this thing. So we're looking around for an anchor to abseil off. there's this huge, massive, big, like, spiky block sticking out, kind of overhanging from the side of the stack where we climbed up. So I have a big sling around this thing. And I say to Will says he'll go first. I look down and I can see the dinghy at the bottom. I'm like, that's quite handy. Will, see if you can just, like, ab into the dinghy. So he abs down, got 70 meter half ropes, by the way. Yeah. He abs straight down into the dinghy.
That's mega.
Perfect. Like, it couldn't have gone any better. And of course, that Scott follows, and then I take the last ab, and we're both in the dinghy. We pull the ropes, and we're off.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I must say, it's one of the best days climbing and adventuring I've ever had. I mean, I guess it would only equal the story I'm going to tell you next. Only because the thing I'm going to tell you next is legitimately hard adventure first ascending. But this, just the culmination of culture, of story, of experience and history, the whole combination of the thing, and like the fact that it was a bit of like trying to solve a bit of a mystery, a mystery from history.
Yeah.
Like, I'd read a book written in the 1600s trying to piece together this like several 100-year-old story to marry up with what I see right now in front of me and making it work.
That's wild.
That was it.
Wild.
Yeah.
That's really cool. That's just, I am blown away with every part of that story. There's not many, like, trad climbing's adventure, right? It's all about adventure, but there's not many trad climbs you go out there to do where there's so much risk of death from so many different elements. Like, there's the climbing, there's your dinghy floating off, there's your captain falling into the sea, there's the sea getting you. Like, there's so many things going on there. That is as adventurous as you could possibly get.
Yeah.
That's mega, man.
Yeah.
And to abseil perfectly back down at the dinghy, like, that's perfection.
That wasn't planned, but it was worked.
Tell people it was planned, man.
Yeah.
Tell people it was planned.
Yeah.
And it just we'll skip that bit of the episode. Like, we'll cut that out.
Yeah. So that was the sea stack adventure. But I will be honest, there was two objectives on this trip.
Yeah.
There was the thumb, but then there was the second objective that I really wanted to do. On the first trip, we went climbing on the Isle of Soy, which, as I've said before, was the westernmost tip of the St Kilda archipelago. And last year, we climbed this big, beautiful black face, the northwest face of Soy, we called it. It's like a smaller version of North Wales's, what's it called again? Oh, I've forgotten the name of it. Cloggy. You know Cloggy?
Oh, right. I didn't know where you were going with that one. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've never actually climbed on Cloggy, which
I don't think I have either. Actually.
No. But Guy Robertson, who was on our trip from year one, he kept on saying, "Oh, it's like a small version of Cloggy." Or like a more adventurous version of Cloggy. Bursting straight out of the sea. But anyway, it's this beautiful sheet of black gabbro that just comes straight out of the sea. And we climbed this a pitch 3 pitch E5, which we called the Last Queen of Scotland. And but when we went to climb that, on the other side of the ridge, there was this enormous overhanging face. I mean, it just made this black face of Soy tiny by comparison. This thing was monstrous.
And how big was the south faces?
That one was about 100 meters.
And this thing dwarfed it.
This thing was like massive, much bigger. Yeah, and I couldn't quite tell how big it was and exactly how steep it was. Yeah. Like you gotta understand, we're on a boat. Yeah, and we're looking face on at this thing, this monstrous wall. And the one thing that was noticeable was there's this huge section right in the middle of the face where there's no algae. There's this there's this like bright orange algae that seems to appear about halfway up the face or a bit further maybe. And as it gets higher and higher and higher, the orange gets even more bright, and eventually it turns into this green moss at the top. And what I figured out was that obviously the moss grows wherever water can get.
Yeah.
So wherever water doesn't get,
Dry rock.
there's no algae. Yeah. So that middle section must be so steep that no water ever touches it. That was what I imagined.
Yeah.
But we're seeing this thing face on, so I don't really know how steep it is. I just know it looks very, very steep and very, very intimidating.
Yeah.
But we didn't have time to go and try it this trip, so it had to be this year's trip. When I got home after trip 1, I opened this book that I'd bought on St Kilda, and while leafing through it one evening, I saw this picture. I was so lucky that I saw this picture. It was a picture taken from a helicopter, I think from a military survey, that took an angled shot at that face. And I could see how steep it was. It was monstrous. It was at least 30 degrees overhanging for possibly over 100 meters.
Mate,
it was huge. Insane. Sorry. Bonnie, shut up. So we arrive this year, me and Will, desperate to climb this thing. I have actually been staring at a high resolution image of this face for over a year now, or for around about a year, and I've basically dialed it down to 2 specific lines that I thought would be cool to take. Anyway, after me and Will had a look at the 2 lines, we narrowed down to just a single line on the left hand side. We think it's the easiest line to take, and we think that's the best option because we want to get to the top of this thing. We don't want to make it harder than it needs to be. I have a habit of choosing the hardest things.
Yes, you do.
And
we'll come on to that later.
Yeah. But we figured, right, let's go for the easiest thing possible to get ourselves up this thing. The dinghy, Scott zips us both in the dinghy, and as we get closer, the wall looms over our heads, and I just realise how absolutely insane this is to be trying to climb this thing. It is so steep. When me and Will actually climb up to the base of the thing, it's just, I can't quite put into words how nervous and how scared I was, because I realised this is so steep. I don't actually know how we would get back, how we would retreat back to safety if we're not able to do this.
Yeah, like, that's a big wall. If you managed to get most of the way out it and then couldn't do the last 10 meters of your line, how do you get back?
Well, this was a question. I was genuinely nervous. So Will takes the first pitch, and by the end of the first pitch, he's absolutely burst. Like his forearms are screaming, and I climb up to join him. The first pitch, it wasn't too bad. On second, it was pumpy, but on second, I didn't have to place any of the gears, so I was just like moving, and that was the easiest pitch and the least steep, and it was still pretty steep.
Yeah.
And I joined him, and Will was like, "Man, this looks so hard, and I'm broke. I don't know if I'm going to be able to lead anything else today." I was like, "Okay, man." I was like, "We'll just take it one step at a time." So anyway, I start climbing, and instantly it's all on my arms.
Yeah.
There's no getting away. You're not really escaping from this. The quality of the rock was okay. It wasn't as good as I'd hoped, but it was good enough. It wasn't Dunmingly where you're like grabbing on beautiful, hard jugs.
Monster flakes.
Yeah. It was like if you've got that sort of steepness, but like on kind of a mixture of cracks and sloping jugs and crimps, but it was really technical climbing, and very three-dimensional, but with very little respite. And also, because it was so steep and the wall was so featured, it became very confusing to read it.
Yeah.
And also, when you're looking up and hanging in that steepness, you have a ticking, clock as well, because your forearms are getting more and more pumped. Not to mention the fact that the sun was burning down on us at that point. It was hot. I was sweating profusely. And I was running out of gear because I was placing so much gear because I was so bloody scared. And I was running out of gear constantly. So we were doing these, I'd say, like fairly good sized pitches, and they were pretty well protected, but it was so intense. I think I managed the first pitch, and in the second, and which was probably like E6 or E7, and in the next pitch after that, I fell off. I was like,
I mean, good effort getting to there. Jeez.
Yeah. It was really hard. There was this really brutally hard section. One thing I hadn't really realized was I'd been looking at this high res image for about a year.
Yeah.
And I'd see all these features. But what you don't realize is this wall is so big that these features are big as well. Yeah. And so you see a crack, and then you see a blank spot, and then you see another crack. And so you think, oh, I'll just put one hand in the top of that crack and move the other hand to the top of that crack. No, because that blank spot is the size of a Land Rover. It's like it's not a small distance. It's huge. And suddenly this blank spot, thankfully the blank spots have features, but they're not jugs. They're crimps, or they're pinches, or there's always something, but it's not always easy. And there was some big runouts, and there was this one bit where I took a bit of a run out, and the next bit of gear was a black totem where only one cam was engaged, and the crux following that fell about like V8 or font 7B on a really shouldery sequence, and I engaged in the move, and then all my like psych just completely disappeared, and I just like lowered myself tentatively onto the black totem and hoped to God it wasn't going to break, and it held as I like sat onto it very like cautiously, and then looked down at Will and was like, mate, like this is just getting a bit too much right now. I'm going to try and aid through this section. And he was like, no, that's fair. So I actually hadn't planned on doing any aiding. So I wasn't set up for I didn't have x-rays. I didn't have any of that stuff. I didn't have Jumars. I just had some slings. So I just got this sling and put my foot into it on this half engaged black totem, grabbing these little Gaston pinches, standing as high as I possibly could into a sort of flared crack. And I realized the flared crack, I tried to get my hand into it properly, but I wasn't engaging enough. And then I had to lower myself again onto that horrible totem, and realized I didn't have the reach to get my hand into the crack and the strength. So then I just grabbed a cam and managed to just get the lobes of the cam in the sort of flared crack and grab the cam and then pull up and clip to that. Yeah. And so there's a 1 meter or 1.5 meter section, something like that, which I had to aid to get through. And honestly, I still lose sleep at night thinking about it. Because I so desperately wanted to free climb the whole thing. But I realized, after getting to that section and just struggling so much, I realized I could spend a long time here. Mm-hmm. And our goal is to get to the top of this thing. This is a first ascent. This is adventure climbing. There's kind of we're not placing bolts here, there's no rules.
Yeah, it goes back to by any means.
By any means. We need to get to the top of this thing. And I'm still looking up. I don't see the top. Like, it's just steepness for a long way. I've got no idea how much harder this is going to get. Like, Robbie, just put your ego aside and let's just see if we can get to the top of this thing. So I pull on the cam and I keep climbing. I get to another anchor. I build it. Will follows. I've got to say as well, Will did phenomenally well because we didn't bring any Jumars and he was really struggling to second the climbing because seconding on that angle is just horrible. It's just hard. In some ways, it's often harder than leading because at least when you're leading, you know, you're not going to fall out from the wall, you know. So he was struggling to second it, and when he was falling off, he was in space and he was having to Jumar on. He was just Jumaring up on a prusik, you know, on these half ropes, these bloody like 7-9 half ropes. And every time he'd get to the belay, he would look more burst than I did, you know, leading the thing. And I would say, "Are you up for this one?" And he's like, "Nah, mate, you can do it." It's like, "Don't worry, I've got this. So I keep climbing. The next pitch, I can't remember if it was the next pitch or the pitch after that, was just total choss. We'd entered like Chossville, right? And it's still super steep. I'm shoving my arms into these like enormous cracks. There's stuff falling out onto me. At one point, I grab I say to Will, I think the next hold is going to break. So I reach up for the next hold, and the hold I'm grabbing breaks. I fall off, and I karate kick Will in the head. I was like, that. I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting the other hold to break, not the one I was actually holding on to. He's like, "It's okay, mate." Anyway, pull back on. Thankfully, I get to the top of this next pitch, at which point it starts easing off, and then slowly but surely, we had the last, or the penultimate pitch, I should say. The penultimate pitch was just one of the most beautiful pitches on the whole wall. A little bit of a scary start, and then it was just like really fun, athletic E6 climbing to get onto the final ramp, which was essentially a walk off. And Will said, "I'll take this lead, mate." So I said, "Don't worry, you get us to the top, Will." He's like, "I will." "Don't worry."
Nice.
So Will took us to the top, and we finished perfect timing. It was the sun had just set. It was getting dark, and that was it. Our first ascent on this unclimbed sea cliff on the westernmost island of the British Isles, Soe. I think I've climbed a lot of sea cliffs, you know, in recent years. Longhope is a good example, like St. John's Head. I honestly think this place felt way more adventurous than St. John's Head. Way more adventurous. I mean, you're climbing it straight out of the sea. There's no easy way to retreat. I don't know how you'd retreat other than leaving all your gear behind. And after a certain point, you just probably wouldn't have enough gear to get down. You know, it's serious, and you've basically just got to get up it. When you start, you have to go to the top. And there's not very many climbs where that's the case, in real terms. And it's probably about 200 meters of overhanging wall. I don't really think there's any other sea cliff in the British Isles that you can actually say that. I've not come across any that are that big and that steep and that committing. And I'm happy to be proved wrong. You know, when this comes out and people listen to it, I'd love to hear other people's thoughts. But I think it's probably one of the most wild sea cliffs out there.
It has to be.
Yeah.
Just even if it wasn't as long and it wasn't as overhanging and it wasn't as hard, just given where it is, just its location alone is wild compared to 90% of the sea cliffs in the UK, in the world. Yeah.
I'm sure in the world there's some stuff, but I think for our little grouping of islands, you know, the British Isles, I think
sea cliff climbing in the rest of the world isn't as big as it is in the UK.
Tassie, I guess, is like a lot of sea cliff climbing there. I think there's stuff up in Canada. I'm not really sure, to be honest. I've not done any sea cliff climbing outside the UK. But something I did want to say about this is that, you know, you hear a lot of a lot of stories these days, people going to far-flung locations around the globe seeking, real, raw adventure. People traveling to places like Greenland, Baffin Island, looking for this sense of adventure and exploration. And I think it's quite common for people to kind of think that in the British Isles we've done it all. And this was a clear as day example that we certainly haven't. And there is far more on our little grouping of islands than I think has been imagined prior. And a really funny conversation I had with a friend whilst on a trip to Spain earlier this year. She had just returned from a big walling first ascending trip in East Greenland, yeah, and alongside a group of some of the gnarliest female alpinists in the world. And I was talking to her about my St Kilda trip, and she said that it sounded so incredible and so wild, far wilder than their Greenland trip. And I was like, what? I was like, but you went to Greenland, it's like on the other side of the world, and it's like this, place of massive big walls and everything. And she went, yeah, we got off the plane, we got a taxi to the walk-in. The walk-in's a couple of hours, and then you're at the base of a big wall. I was like, that's East Greenland. Like, that's what a lot of, I'm not saying that is East Greenland, but a lot of the big walls that get done are actually relatively easy accessed. And obviously that's not the case with somewhere like Baffin Island, but I did think that was quite a funny thing to think, that you could go on a trip to East Greenland and it'd be far more accessible than going on a trip to St Kilda. And St Kilda's just there. 60 miles off the coast of Harris, 100 miles off the coast of the mainland of the UK. It's just there, But it's so hard to get to. It's so hard to access. To get to Soy, everything needs to be perfect. You need to have a boat to be able to get access to the island, because there's no easy way of getting from the main island of Herta to Soy, And you also need to have the seas calm enough to actually jump from the dinghy onto the boat. That was actually the most dangerous part of the day often, was getting onto the landmass.
That bit of footage of you guys on the first trip out there that you did, where you jump off the dinghy, the whole time we were watching you in the dinghy, I'm sitting there going, don't jump, don't jump, don't jump, don't do it. And then the dinghy disappears out of sight behind a wave for a second, and when it comes back up, you're not in it. And it's like, where's Robbie? Oh no, he did it! He did the thing! Oh my god!
Yeah, he did the thing.
Man, yeah, I had my heart in my mouth there. So, are you gonna go back? Like,
of course I am.
Like, this is a bit of a bigger question. Are you gonna go back to try and repeat that route or the other line that you spotted on that wall? Is there other things on the island that you want to do, or has this sparked a fire to set sail to other adventurous locations and try and find just what you're saying, like just as out there and wild adventures as you could find anywhere else in the world but here at home?
Yeah, I'd say all of that. Honestly, I mean, literally everything you've said, I'm psyched on. I mean, first and foremost, yeah, I've got an itching to go back and repeat the route, but free it. I will be dead honest with myself. When I went out there, I wasn't fit or strong for climbing hard. I was in a sort of adventure mode, and I had a lot of things on my plate at the time. So I think if I'd gone now, right now I'm really like feeling quite sport fit and strong. Applying that to trad, I would do really well. I honestly think if I went back now, I would do it. But that doesn't matter, it was part of the experience. It was going out there and having an adventure. And
I hope poor Will doesn't listen to this.
Why? What's wrong?
Had a hard time on that route, sounds like, and you're like, I did most of it, but I wasn't very fit.
No. I don't know how to answer that. No. Well, I don't know. Like, I know. I guess I know myself. Yeah. Like what I'm capable of, and I felt I was a bit unfit at the time. Like I think we did well to get up the thing. I'd like to go back fitter and stronger and actually free climb the thing.
Now you know where the line goes and where the gear is and where the moves are.
Kind of, yeah.
You'd be able to prep a little bit better.
We've still done the first ascent off the wall. We named it Summerled after the boat, and I also felt Summerled is the I think he was like a Viking from history. He was dubbed Lord of the Isles. He was one of the Vikings who settled in the Western Isles. I thought that was a fitting name to give the climb. So I would definitely go back to try and climb it. I would like to go and put other routes on that face. I think it's as I said before, I think it's the wildest sea cliff I've seen in the British Isles. Equally, I think that there's so much in the British Isles along the west coast of the Outer Hebrides and Harris and Lewis, and I'd love to take a boat up there and explore else what is on offer. I'm sure there's just countless stuff. And from the vantage of a boat, you have that freedom and maneuverability to go where you want and see things from different perspectives.
You can access certain things that you just wouldn't be able to without the boat.
Exactly,
You know,
yeah.
There's definitely some crags that walking in from a place is not... It would take you weeks to get to some of these locations. And just the logistics of getting to the bottom of the things are wild. Whereas being able to drop in with a dinghy off a yacht is... That's the luxury way of life, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's having the right people as well. Like, we were really lucky. The first year we had Charles Smallwood, who was our skipper, and he was just amazing. A 70-odd-year-old, retired shipping lawyer his boat, the Half Light, was amazing, and he was just such an adventurous guy and well up for it. And that's ultimately what you want. And this year we had Scott from Yachting Scotland, and I mean, that guy was just so much fun, and like every day was hilarious, jokes and just like crazy banter, like just, oh man, it was great. And he was just like, he was well up for getting, us right in so that we could get what we wanted done. And he was also incredibly conscious of how to keep us safe and to make sure that I talk about that thing earlier about the boat, but he knew what he was doing. He knows what he's doing. And I think you've always got to, man, bottom line is, to do these things, you've got to be a wee bit mad. I'm a wee bit mad. Scott's definitely got a screw loose, but that's what makes great adventurers. You know what I mean? That's what we need to be able to go out and do these things. But I guess the other cool thing is this type of adventure. It's like a sort of relatively sustainable type of adventure. It doesn't require flying to Greenland, to go and have an adventure. It's right on our relative doorstep. It's just across there, but it is hard to access. But with the right people and the means and the motives, then we can make it happen.
Access by sailboat is one of the most eco-friendly modes of transport we can use to get to a crag as well.
Yeah, exactly.
You are more eco-friendly going there than most people are getting to Dumby.
Is that right?
Oh, probably.
We'll say it, and it'll be true.
Say it. Yeah, argue with me, I dare you.
That's funny. So I mean, I'm psyched to kind of explore more. Our plans, or some of my plans for next year, are to either do another Scottish sailing trip, as kind of maybe up Lewis and Harris way, or I did potentially have an opportunity to go sail to Norway in the summer, and that would be a dream. But we'll see. I'm not 100% sure which one, but it'll be one of them. Yeah.
Nice. So I think for people that saw the first Kilda video, there will be the question: did you bring home any birds this time?
Oh yeah, the last one was we Charlie the pigeon.
Yeah.
We didn't bring any birds back this time. Was there any animal stuff?
I mean, it wouldn't be one of your videos if there wasn't some bird antics
know.
going on.
I don't think there was any animal-related experiences really on this trip, sadly. Although when Scott did say next time we should bring Bonnie. And then I
That'd be wild.
was like, Bonnie on a sailboat, do you reckon that'd be alright? And he's like, yeah, Bonnie'd be fine.
Bonnie'd be fine on the sailboat.
Yeah.
Are dogs allowed on Kilda?
Probably not, actually.
RSPB are fairly protective of certain islands.
That's a good question. Well, not that, but like one thing I should mention on the podcast. All this was done in complete support with the National Trust of Scotland, the NTS, who are the wardens and the caretakers of the St Kilda archipelago, as well as many of the islands in the Outer Hebrides, like Berneray, Barrowhead, Mingley, Pabby, and they knew well in advance. Like, I was in communication with them a year in advance for this trip, and they were great. And as I was completely, clear as day with my plans and objectives, and balanced it with any issues that any worries that they might have, which the key worries were always bird related. They were worried about nesting birds, but because we went in September, there was no nesting birds on the sea cliffs. There was still the ground nesting storms, leeches, petrels, but we didn't have to come into contact with them because we were accessing everything from the ground up or from the sea up, and anywhere we were going on land, there wasn't any birds nesting there. So that was a key thing that I wanted to mention. They're fantastic, the NTS. They do a lot of good work, and it's one thing. I'm making a film about this trip. It's going to be quite a big process to see to fruition, but they were a huge part in that, and so that's going to be a big thing I talk about, is the work that they do, and something I want to really promote.
Man, Kilda sounds wild, doesn't it? Epic adventure. But remember, this is a two-parter, so to learn more about the man himself, look out for part 2. But in the meantime, do your buddy checks.